Hey guys! Today we'll be recapping the manhwa. The promise isn't mine. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, as it really helps our channel grow. Thanks. The scene unfolded with a view of a war. A young and handsome knight stands there holding his sword. Some soldiers standing in front of him die. They attacked him while shouting, "You monster!" But their move goes useless as the knight stands without any damage. They get shocked seeing him. Meanwhile, he attacked them and hit them all in no time. Meanwhile, an aura comes from his wound. He faltered and said, "Not now." His hand starts to transform and he thinks, seeing his hand, "If I become a dragon right now." In meantime, his soldier comes shouting, "Highness! Your Highness!" He gets interrupted by him. The soldier comes and asked him, "Are you all right, Your Highness?" He said to him, "Please hold yourself together. You mustn't lose control of yourself here." The man holds his hand and then, seeing it clenched his hand, he thinks he's right. Just 10 more days and I'll finally be able to die while human. However, if fate might be so kind as to allow it, it is my wish to see you one last time, before I die. Changing scenes, we saw a beautiful grand palace. A girl with golden hair standing outside raised her hand in air and said, "It's snowing." She thinks Leyla's never been away for this long before. What could be causing her to be so late? She thinks, and it's not just Leyla, I've barely seen any of the bishops today as well. We don't have that many days left together anymore. Where have you gone, Leyla? She recalls a moment when she was standing with her twin sister in forest surrounded by some priests. A priest said to her twin sister, "You may begin now, Leyla." She grabs her hand and said, "Leyla." Her sister said, "It's okay." Then her sister starts magic. A glowing aura comes from her hand. With her aura, a plant starts to grow. Then it becomes a grown tree in no time, and the priest said, "Ah, what incredible power!" She faltered and the priest said, "Truly a testament to her being the Holy Maiden." She said, "If she exerts herself any further." Meanwhile, the priest grabs her. He said to her, "What are you waiting for, Elena?" Other priest said, "It's your turn to show us your powers now." Elena thinks, "I can do it. I know I can." Standing there, she thinks, "This time for sure." She shouts, "Please," and starts showing her powers. But nothing happened and everyone stands there silently. While a priest said, "Being twins, you two were born, each bearing half of the holy markings. So what could possibly account for your lack of power?" Coming back to her sense, she clenched her hand. She closed her eyes and thinks, "Steward of the sacred tree of life, the Landfair Empire." According to legend, to ensure the protection of the tree of life, the Mighty One entrusted this land to 2 guardians: the black-scaled dragon of peerless strength, and the Holy Maiden, she who brings peace through healing. With the passage of time, however, the dragon found himself in love with the Holy Maiden. And soon he took the shape of man to become Landfair's emperor and demanded the people live in worship of the maiden. Yeah, the duty given to the dragon was protecting the tree of life. Angered by the dragon's neglect of his duty, the Mighty One spoke thus: "Of those who inherit your blood I shall take as my share the mightiest and wisest sons." Thereafter in Landfair, many were born of the dragon's lineage, who possessed mighty strength far exceeding that of ordinary man. But of those, not one avoided an early demise. However, when the Holy Maiden, who had fallen for a descendant of the dragon, cried and begged for the Mighty One's forgiveness, he in his mercy answered her prayer. Thus the birth and marriage of the Holy Maiden and the dragon's descendant ushered in a new era of glory for the empire. Seeing her wrist, she thinks, "But if the legend really is true, why? Why we born twins? And why? Do I lack the power to protect anyone?" It's already been 10 years since Leyla's betrothal to the crown prince. Now, less than 10 days remain until their marriage. And when Leyla is finally gone, I will be trapped in this empire alone, forced to live the rest of my life in solitude. Meanwhile, someone comes holding a light. A priest comes and said to her, "Ah, there you are, Elena." he said to her. I am told that you've been looking for Leyla all day. Elena replied, yes, but I've yet to find her. She asked him, has something happened to Leyla, perhaps? He said, it appears the decision that the Archbishop have made in the past was the right one. He steps closer to her saying, rejoice, for the Mighty One has revealed your calling. He holds her shoulder and said, Leyla has disappeared without a trace. You must, therefore, marry the crown prince in her stead. Hearing this, she gets shocked. They went down in the palace, and after many stairs going down, Elena thinks, just how far down are we going? Where could these stairs possibly lead? After reaching down, she tries to figure out where she was. Seeing the place she thinks is this: the sacred chamber where the bishops hold their meetings. The priest said to Grand Priest, I have brought Elena, your grace. The Grand Priest said, so she really has run off while leaving her sister behind. How cruel, he said, but perhaps this is a cause for celebration. Hearing this, Elena gets confused. He grabs her saying, for you finally now have a purpose. He pushes her away saying, I'm sure you've already been informed. He said to Elena, we shall depart for the palace together once a carriage is sent here in 10 days. Elena gets shocked when he said, do not forget that you must assume the identity of Holy Maiden Leyla when you are there. Elena said to him, but you know that I don't possess the powers of the Holy Maiden, your grace. He replied, it doesn't matter. I doubt the Emperor has any interest in planting greenery. He said, you see, most think of the marriage between the descendants of the dragon and Holy Maiden merely as custom. However, the true purpose of such a marriage is to hide a certain uncomfortable truth about this land. Yes, the truth that he who continues to use the dragon's powers eventually becomes a dragon. Hearing this, all Elena thinks, I thought all that about the dragon's powers was a fairy tale. But it wasn't it. It's not merely a legend then? That means, she asked, what happens once one becomes a dragon? The Grand Priest smiled a bit and replied, you shall know in due time. He said, one can delay his transformation into a dragon through the Holy Maiden's powers. However, one cannot altogether escape the fate of becoming a dragon. Crown Prince Lanfear began roaming the battlefields and causing bloodshed when he was only 16 years old. Though I doubt he wasn't aware that the more one uses the dragon's powers, the closer he becomes to turning into one. He said, regardless, no one will suspect a thing as long as you keep your act up until his transformation. Elena asked, but, in that case I shouldn't. Meanwhile, the Grand Priest interrupts her saying, I see you still have yet to grasp the gravity of the situation. With your sister gone, we have but two choices to make. If we exclude the choice of sending you to the palace in Leyla's place, our only other choice is to tell the Emperor the truth that the Holy Maiden has gone missing. Do you think that the Emperor will sit idly by upon hearing that? He said he'd turn the temple upside down, if it's to find the Holy Maiden. And if his men find out about you during their search, we'd have no choice but to confess that the Holy Maiden has a twin sister and that we'd kept quiet about it all this time. As the Archbishop, I'd rather be rid of you. Then have the entire temple sent to the gallows for betraying the Emperor's trust. He said to her, so answer me, Elena Underwood. She clenched her hands and Grand Priest asked her, marriage or death, which will you choose? After some time, Elena was wearing the bridal dress and two servants were helping her getting ready. A servant helps her doing making. Elena thinks it's as the Archbishop said. Not a single person suspects me, or rather not a single person is interested in me. She thinks, honestly, I can't help but find this strange. The dragon's descendant is part of the imperial lineage. The Crown Prince's safety could be on the line, so why aren't they truly inquiring into me? It's as if they have no interest in what happens to him. She raised from her seat thinking, but I suppose there's no use worrying about that. She thinks, though I may be able to fool the others, the Crown Prince met Leyla when they were both young. While going towards the wedding place, she thinks, if he finds out I'm not who I claim to be, there will be no way to avoid the Emperor's punishment. She, holding a bouquet of white flowers in her hand, thinks, I don't want to die. Please, if you're watching from somewhere, share your courage with me, as you did back then. She stands at her place and waits for the crown prince while the people in audience said, I can't help but pity this generation's Holy Maiden. To be betrothed to the likes of that crown prince. Someone said, hush! Lower your voice if you don't want to lose your head. A man asked, when's the crown prince arriving anyway? The other man said, the bride's been standing alone by herself for hours. The sun's going to set at this rate. Meanwhile, Elena, tired while standing there for long, and clenched the bouquet, thinking, I mustn't lose my composure. She thinks Leyla wouldn't be bothered by such words. Meanwhile, the Emperor, seeing her, said, I see that she's able to stay composed even in a situation like this. He said, I think I now understand why Kyle behaved himself whenever I brought up his fiancée's name. A servant comes and said to him, Forgive me for my impudence, but are you certain the conference will show your majesty? He said, I'm afraid sending Prince Kyle on an expedition on the eve of his marriage may have been a rather unreasonable. The emperor asked him, Aren't you curious? He replied, Your Majesty? The emperor said, He's always obliged to whatever command at the mansion of his fiancée. He said with a small smile on his face, I want to check with my own eyes the degree of his earnestness. He thinks, prove to me, Kyle Landfair. Show me how far you're willing to go to get what you desire. For that shall decide the direction of my next move. Meanwhile, the door opens and everyone gets confused. Elena turns and sees towards door and gets confused. Seeing Kyle in armor, someone said, A man in black armor. Kyle removed his helmet and steps forwards. While seeing him, the audience said, No, this is simply impossible. You mean to say that man is the crown prince? While he was moving towards the stage, people said, Hush! Don't you see he carries the sword that was bestowed upon him by the emperor himself? You'll lose your head if you keep talking. The crown prince wouldn't walk into his own wedding ceremony looking like that. Seeing him, the emperor starts laughing, Ha ha ha. Elena thinks, and yet the emperor is laughing, and no one is stopping the man's path. Which must mean that he is Crown Prince Kyle Landfair, the man who's to become my husband. Kyle throws his helmet and asked her for an apology. I apologize for the wait. Kyle stands in front of her and said, Let us exchange our vows and get this ceremony over. Why? Meanwhile, he opens his eyes and saw Elena. Seeing her, he suddenly remembered their past. Seeing him glaring at her, she gets confused. She thinks, Why is he looking at me like that? She thinks, it's as if he's just seen a ghost. Kyle raised his hand. He removes armor from her arm. He steps forward. He gets close to Elena and said, Your hand, please. Elena gets confused. She moves her hand to Kyle's hand. Kyle, holding her hand, said, I, Kyle Landfair, solemnly vow. He placed the ring in her finger and said, To take thee, Leyla Underwood, to be my wedded wife. With a cold look he continues, Till death do us part. Meanwhile, after some time, Kyle was sitting beside a window, lost in his thoughts. He thinks, Why was she the one at the altar? Meanwhile, he turns and saw his blade. He raised and moved towards it. He picks it and draw it out. The blade was this sharp and clear that he saw his face on it. Meanwhile, someone knocks at the door and Kyle asked, Who is it? A servant standing next to Elena outside of his room said, Your wife, the crown princess, wishes to see you, your highness. The door opens and she steps in. Kyle and Elena both look each other standing in front of each other. Meanwhile, Lau clenched his hand and suddenly grabs her, saying, Come in. The servant goes back and the door gets closed. Elena was confused standing at the door seeing Kyle. Kyle with a cold look asked, Are you going to just keep standing there? Hearing this, Elena gets confused. She clenched her hand and thinks, He might find it suspicious if I don't say anything. She inhales and thinks, I must act like how Leyla would. She wouldn't lose her composure even in a situation like this. She said, I still have yet to hear your intentions with me. She said, If you intend to claim me, I shall be yours. However, if you do not, I shall leave." Meanwhile, she shivered and Kyle noticed her. Kyle said, "Though you tremble as you speak. However, I don't understand what you mean to say." Saying this, Kyle turns back. He said, "I heard from the bishops that you were blindfolded whenever you rode in a carriage. Is that true?" Elena replied, "Yes." Kyle said, "In that case, you mustn't have had the opportunity to see this properly." Hearing this, Elena gets surprised. She asked him, "Is that the tree of life, a grand tree that stands in the center of the empire? It derives its name from the fact that it was the first ever plant to set root in this world." She comes to window and seeing the tree thinks, "I heard that the tree only bears leaves when a descendant of dragon is born. This is my first time seeing it in person." She gets happy seeing it and said with a smile on her face, "It seems that the flowers might bloom anytime soon." Seeing her smiling, Kyle also gets happy and make a small smile. He grabs her saying, "Indeed. As you say, the flowers shall soon bloom," he said in her ear, "and by then it'll be too late." He said, "You haven't forgotten your duty, have you?" Hearing this, she gets shocked and confused. Elena said, "My duty is to delay your transformation into—" Meanwhile, Kyle interrupts her saying, "Wrong." He said, "Once the flowers of the tree of life come into full bloom, the descendant of the dragon transforms irrevocably into a dragon. In other words, I'll lose my life as a human and turn into a complete monster. I trust you have not forgotten the promise you made to me 8 years ago, Leyla." Saying this, he gives her his blade. He squeezed her hand and said, "You swore that you'd free me before I turned into a dragon." Hearing this, Elena gets completely shocked and confused. Kyle, with a smile on his face, said to her, "So kill me as you promised." He, pointing his finger to his chest, said to her, "Here?" He said, "Stab me here with all your might." Hearing this, Elena lost his mind for a second and gets shocked. She thinks, "Did I hear that right? He wants me to stab him. Is he seriously telling me to kill someone I met for the first time today?" She starts trembling and thinks, "What do I do? Should I just tell him the truth? I'm not Leyla, the one who made that promise to you." She drops the blade and shouts in her mind, "Isn't me!" Kyle gets disappointed and Elena said, "I will not." Kyle raised and asked her, "You won't, you say?" He said, "Then there's no reason for you to be here." He gets close to her and said, "If you don't intend to keep your promise." He, giving a cold look, said, "Leave this palace at once." She thinks, hearing this, "Leave the palace? That means I'll have to return too." She recalled Grand Priest's words, "Do not forget this, Elena. All that will be awaiting you upon your return is death." She thinks, "I can't go back." Seeing Kyle, she thinks, "However, my only other choice is to kill this man." Kyle asked her, "Why are you hesitating?" He gets close to her and said, "If you don't kill me here and now, you'll be the one who has to face me when I become a dragon." Elena starts sweating and asked, "How so?" Kyle clenched his hand and said, "The dragon's descendant possesses a body that is near immortal. Neither the slash of a sword nor the flames of fire can kill him, for his body will simply regenerate. The only individual who can kill such a man is the Holy Maiden." Hearing this, she thinks, "I can't believe it. Is this what the Archbishop meant when he told me that I'd know everything in due time?" Kyle grabs her saying, "If you won't grant me my wish of dying while human, I ask that you at least grant me this other request." He said in a low tone, "Please do not stay by my side." Elena clenched his cloths and asked, "And what if I refuse?" Elena shouts, "Are you telling me to run away and save my own skin?" She said, "If I do so, everyone will either get killed or hurt, and who knows what the angry populace would do to you." Kyle said, "It's preposterous that you're still worrying about the lives of others despite your own predicament." Suddenly, Kyle lifts her on his shoulder. She gets confused and shouts, "What are you? Let me down at once." Kyle said, "If you won't leave on your own, then I shall simply have to make you." Kyle takes her somewhere and she asked, "Where are you taking me?" Your Highness, please. He went downstairs and she shouts, Please wait. Kyle said to her, There's no need to worry. While still holding her on his shoulder, he said, You should be able to avoid the worst once you're out of Landfair. She asked him, Do you intend to drive me out of this land? He takes her in his arms and ached, Isn't it obvious why they sent you here? All they care about is achieving their end. Your safety is of no importance to them. He said, There is not a single soul in this land who will thank you for your sacrifice. Hearing his words, Elena thinks he's right. However, if I leave, what will become of the man who saved my life? They come outside where a man was waiting for them with a horse. Kyle said, Go with that man over there. And the man bowed. Elena asked him, But what of you, Your Highness? She asked him, As you say, the bishops may be the ones to bear the consequences if I leave, but she thinks, if I return to the temple, I'll surely be dead. I know I'm not in the position to be worrying about someone else right now. But still, she asked him, What will become of you once you turn into a dragon? Kyle said, That is not Emperor. She interrupts him saying, It is. She said, You keep worrying about my safety instead of your own. She asked him, Have you never thought to run away? She said, The only fate that awaits you here is death, so why do you try not to run away? She squeezed his shirt saying, Perhaps you'd be better off a dragon than a dead man. Kyle sighed and replied, There is something I fear more than death. He said, You see, I want to die as myself. He grabs her and said, I don't want to lose myself and end up destroying what I hold so dearly. Seeing him, she thinks, I've seen this look before. She recalls a moment she was sitting with him, and he said, I'd like you to become my amigo, then. She asked, Your amigo? He replied, Someone who is like the other half of my soul, a shadow that follows me wherever I go, a reflection I see in the mirror. If I could live my life knowing that you'd always be my side, I feel like I could. Amigo. She said to him, There was someone I knew in the past who taught me this word. They said if they could find someone irreplaceable to them, they might be able to believe that there's an end to all troubles. I do not dare suggest that I could become that person to you. However, I'd like you to allow me to stay by your side in a similar fashion. Meanwhile, she thinks, I'm not Leyla. She squeezed her cloth thinking, but he seems to truly believe I am. And there's one thing I can tell from the look on his face and his actions tonight. The person he cherishes above everyone else, his amigo, is none other than Leyla, whom I am a mirror reflection of. She said, You waited a long 8 years for me? I do not wish to leave you behind here so that I can run off by myself. She said, You are the only person who has worried for my safety as the Holy Maiden, so I too would like to help you. She touches his hand saying, If I were able to find a way to prevent your transformation, would you be willing to live life anew? Hearing this, he clenched his hand and asked, Live life anew? He asked her, Do you truly believe that is possible? Countless scholars, physicians, and bishops have endeavored to cure the dragon's descendants, yet not one has been able to avoid his fate. There is not a single exception to this. He said, Fate isn't something that can be changed. She flinched and said, I do not think likewise. She thinks, if what the Archbishop told you is true, Leyla and I are the first holy maidens to have been born as twins. His words that there has been no exception give me assurance. If there truly is a path called fate, then that path has already taken a new direction. My very existence is proof of that. She said to him, I'll find a way to turn you completely into a human. Elena said, Before the flowers of Tree of Life bloom. So please give me a chance to prove you wrong. Hearing her words, he clenched his hand. He slammed his hand on the wall in frustration. He said to her in anger, What do I hate to say to make you understand? He shouts, You're merely endangering your own life by staying by my side. She exhales and asked him, If I leave, what will happen once you turn into a dragon? What will become of the people of Landfair? She shouts, "Just as you have something you don't want to lose, I have someone dear to me whom I don't want to lose as well." She said, "There's no point in me surviving alone." Kyle gets shocked hearing that she had someone dear to her and asked her, "Someone dear to you, you say?" He asked her, "Are you implying that this person's life is as important as your own?" She said, "I doubt there's much difference in the value you and I place on that which we deem important." Hearing this, Kyle replied, "I see." He turns and said, "If nothing I say will convince you, you're free to do as you please." He said, "However, keep in mind that this will be your only chance." He said, "Shall you fail to fulfill your promise before the first flower of the tree blooms, I'll have you expelled from Landfair." Elena replied, "Understood." He suddenly comes close to her and said, "Also do not forget that you're my wife until then." Elena said, "What might you mean by that, your highness?" Kyle said, "I shan't ask who it is you cherish so dearly. However, I hope you won't make mention of that person again before me." Hearing this, she gets confused and thinks, "Did I say something that bothered him?" She faltered and said, "I shall also bear that in mind." Suddenly she starts feeling dizziness and thinks, "What's happening to me?" She lost her sense thinking, "Is it because my nerves have worn off? I feel." Meanwhile she staggers and seeing her, Kyle gets shocked. He grabs her in his arms. Kyle holding her thinks, there's no need to be alarmed. She's merely fallen asleep. He takes her in his arms and takes her inside. He puts her on bed. He touches her hairs while she was sleeping. He said, "It's as if I'm in a terrible nightmare. Why were you the one sent here instead of her? I never imagined our reunion would take place this way." He said her name, Elena. And we found that he already knew her. Some servants asked to their head servant, "Do you really intend to wake up His Highness, ma'am?" A servant said, "Some have even gotten hurt while trying to wake him up." The other one said, "I'm sure you know that better than anyone else, ma'am." The head servant said, "We've no choice. It's already been half an hour since His Majesty's order to check upon His Highness." The head servant shouts her name, "Julie." She replied, "Yes, ma'am." She steps forward to the door and starts knocking. She said, "Excuse me, Your Highness, but I bring you word from His Majesty." Suddenly Kyle replied, "Come in." Hearing this, she gets shocked. She opens the door and saw him in bed with Elena, and she said, "Your Highness, His Majesty requests that you meet him in an hour." Kyle asked him, "And where does my father want to see me?" Hearing this, servant gets nervous and replied, "I in his office, Your Highness." Kyle raised from bed and touching Elena's hair said, "I shall head there now." He said, "When she wakes up, make sure to inform her so she isn't confused." Seeing him, the servants gets confused. Meanwhile, a servant among them remembers something and turns back. She headed towards Kyle's brother's room and tell him about Kyle and Elena. He asked her, "You mean to say that my brother is head over heels with the crown princess?" She replied, "Why yes, it appears so, Your Highness." Writing something on a paper, he said, He draws a line on paper, messing the whole written paper, and said, "Now that's unexpected." He said, "How very unlike him." Meanwhile, Kyle wearing black and white dress walking through a hallway. He thinks, "My decision last night was too rash. I ended up allowing Elena to stay in the palace." But he recalls last night when Elena said, "There was someone I knew in the past who taught me this word." He thinks, "I wasn't able to think clearly from the moment I found out she hadn't forgotten about me." He thinks, the fact that she recalls that memory but is unable to recognize me must be because of how much I've changed since then. Regardless, I allowed the excitement of finding out that she still remembers me to distract. He thinks, no, was that the only reason? Elena said, "There's no point in me surviving alone." He thinks, perhaps what I really wanted was to separate Elena from whoever her special someone might be. Kyle sighed and covered his face with his hand. Her brother comes and said to him, "What an unusual sight." He said, "It's not every day I find you sighing like that." Seeing him, Kyle asked Shane, What business do you have with? Shane steps close to him and said, a bit cold, don't you think? He said, we may have been born to different mothers, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm your one and only brother. Kyle turns saying, I'm afraid I don't have the time to humor you. If you have no business. Meanwhile, Shane interrupts him saying, how's Leyla? Hearing this, he gets shocked. Shane asked, I suppose it's discourteous for me to address her in that manner. Shane bowed and said, forgive my discourtesy, dear brother. He said, ever since the wedding ceremony, all that's been on my mind is how I thought I'd never see that woman again. Meanwhile, hearing this, Kyle grabs him from his shirt. Shane said, why are you so upset? This isn't like you at all. Kyle replied, whatever you may think, it is indisputable that she is now my wife. He said in a cold tone, so do not take an interest in her in whatever manner or form. Shane said, Kyle, do you really think you have the right to say that to me? Kyle leaves his shirt saying, even if you think I don't. He turns and said, should you choose to ignore my warning? Kyle said, I promise there will be grave consequences. Hearing this, Shane sighed. Shane thinks the maid was right. He is acting completely out of character. Shane said, looks like I'd best meet that woman a little earlier. The servants said to Elena, Your Highness, we shall be attending to your needs from now on. She said, shall there be any inadequacies, please feel at ease to point them out to me. Elena thinks, stay calm. It was a given that some might not think well of the Holy Maiden. I must avoid attracting any unwanted suspicion from them. Meanwhile, she noticed a servant sobbing. Seeing a servant crying, she thinks, is someone crying? Elena thinks, I was worried whether I was going to be able to keep up my act as the crown princess, but it seems they're too scared to even begin suspecting me. The head servant said, do not forget whose wife it is you'll be serving from now on. She said, should you incur his anger, you won't live to see another day. The crying servant said, I apologize. Hearing this, Elena squeezed his arm thinking, I see. She thinks, the one they fear isn't me. It's the crown prince. I can't have someone who fears him serving by my side. Though I'd borrowed Leyla's name, I was the one who promised to find a way to prevent his transformation. If I'm to keep my word, I'm going to need a helping hand. Someone who deeply fears the crown prince will only get in the way. I should only keep those who don't fear him, or are strong enough to overcome their fear of him. Elena said, I know full well that Val come from esteemed households. Elena asked the servant, how old might you be? She hesitantly replied, at 15, Your Highness. Elena said, how admirable. Though you're still so young, you've come all the way here for your household sake. The head servant said, forgive me, Your Highness, but Elena waves her hand in air and said, I understand what it is you're trying to say. She said, however, it cannot be denied that most of them have not gathered here of their own accord but for their household sake. She said, besides, my being the crown princess does not change the fact that I am the Almighty One's chosen. Therefore, I do not wish to see them make such an unnecessary sacrifice for my sake. She said, I won't hold any of your households responsible. Elena said, if the thought of remaining here frightens you, please feel free to return to where you might find peace. Elena and a servant named Julie were standing in a room in front of each other. Elena asked her, what might your name be? She replied, it is Julie, Your Highness. Julie Wes. Elena steps towards her saying, are you sure about not following the others? She said, if you don't dare to step away for your household sake. Julie replied, Your Highness. She said, you may not believe me, but I am here of my own accord. You see, I have a promise. 9 years ago, my one and only childhood friend began working for the palace for his family's sake. The duty given to him was to stand at the side of the most dangerous man in the empire and protect him. Upon learning this, many tried to dissuade him, but his resolve never wavered. Therefore, I swore to myself that if the man he protects finds himself a wife, that I'd serve by her side. Elena asked, is the man whom your friend protects perhaps? Meanwhile Sir Phillips comes and said, I have come here by order of His Highness Crown Prince Kyle. He bowed and said to Elena, It is an honor to meet you, Your Highness. I am Philip Baldwin, Sir Kyle's personal guard. Seeing him, Elena thinks, he's the man the Crown Prince entrusted to escort me last night. Elena, seeing Julie, thinks, oh, I see. The way she looks at the man before her, it's as though he's her everything. She reminds me of the way he used to look at me, the boy from my childhood. Meanwhile Sir Philip said, Your Highness? She gets shocked and comes back from her thoughts. Sir Philip said, Sir Kyle has appointed me to henceforth be your personal guard. He said, please feel free to rely on me anytime His Highness is unable to physically be by your side. Sir Kyle has instructed me to prioritize your safety above all else. Hearing this, Elena thinks, to think that he's provided me with his closest retainer. She squeezed her hands thinking, no, I mustn't fool myself. The Crown Prince has obviously done this for Leyla's sake, not mine. She clenched her hand and thinking that he might be doing this for me may very well pull me into an emotional swamp I cannot escape from. Elena closed her eyes thinking, I mustn't forget my promise to the Crown Prince. I have to focus on what must be done. Philip has been serving as the Crown Prince's personal guard for 9 long years. As for Julie, she chose to work here due to her trust and faith in Philip. These two are clearly here of their own conviction. I think I can trust them. Elena said to both of them, Sir Philip, Julie. Prince Kyle and I shall be in your care from now on. Julie said, we shall serve you dutifully, Your Highness. Elena said, well then, there's something I'd like to ask of you two right away. Hearing this, they gets confused. Elena said, I'd like to go to a place where I might find plenty of records of the palace's history. Could you escort me there? Julie and Sir Philip glanced at each other without any word, and Elena asked them, is there a problem, perhaps? Sir Philip replied, I wouldn't necessarily call it a problem. It's just a certain unwelcome guest happens to frequent that place. While walking to their way, Sir Philip walks behind Elena. Elena feels awkward and stops. She said to Sir Philip, Sir Philip? She turns and said, would it be against etiquette if you were to walk by my side? He replied, yes, Your Highness. However, Sir Kyle did instruct me to follow your command. Do you perhaps find my walking behind you uncomfortable? Elena replied, oh, it's not that it bothers me. It's just that there's something I'd like to ask. Sir Philip said, please ask away. I shall answer you to the best of my ability. Elena said, I simply found it curious that, unlike the others, you called the Crown Prince Sir Kyle. Sir Philip replied, oh, I see. So that's what you were wondering about. He said, I have been serving Sir Kyle ever since he was 15 years old. Soon, it will be my 9th year of service. He said, having siblings who are much younger than me, I remember being surprised upon meeting Sir Kyle for the first time. He wasn't all that different from my siblings, you see. He said, I realized very soon, however, just how wrong I was regarding this. Elena asked him, was he different from other children his age? Sir Philip asked, are you aware that Sir Kyle was summoned by the Emperor this morning? Elena replied, yes. The chief maid told me as soon as I arose. Sir Philip said, I'm not sure if you know this, Your Highness, but Sir Kyle engages in major battles without fail, including wars with smaller nations and campaigns against monsters. He said this has been the case ever since he became 17 years old. Descendants of the dragon born with black blood are raised from birth with the expectation that they'll become great warriors. So the reason he appeared at the wedding ceremony covered in blood is. Hearing all this, she squeezed her cloths. She said, understand that he is a descendant of the dragon. However, isn't it cruel that he has had to participate in combat like that ever since he was 17 years old? Meanwhile, she thinks, having been chosen by the Mighty One, Leyla was similarly made to meet others' expectations from a young age. And because of that, she was always miserable. Seeing her lost in thoughts, Sir Philip gets confused. He said, "It gladdens me that you are worried for His Highness." Elena said, "Well, it's the obvious thing to do as his wife." Sir Philip replied, "Haha. Hearing you say that, I think I now understand why he gave me all those orders." He said, "This is the first time Sir Kyle has instructed me to watch over someone to such an extent." Elena asked him, "Is that so?" Standing beside a large red door, he said, "Yes, which is why I feel the need to mention this to you. Before you open those doors," he said, "currently in Lanfair, there are 2 candidates who are widely seen as a potential successor to the throne. As you know, between these 2, Sir Kyle, the Emperor's firstborn, was the one who was conferred the title of Crown Prince." Elena asked him, "Doesn't the fact that he was conferred the title by itself make him next in line to the throne?" Sir Philip replied, "That is true as far as the public is concerned." He said, however, the Emperor found himself a second wife after the previous Empress passed away. Prince Shane, the Emperor's second son and Sire Kyle's half-brother, was born from this marriage. Most nobles, aware that the dragon's descendant is fated to a short life, yearn for a ruler capable of a long-lasting reign over a fleeting one. Elena said, "In other words, they believe Prince Shane will ultimately claim the throne as he'll outlive his brother." Sir Philip replied, "It's as you say." He said, "As of now, Prince Shane has never brought this matter up himself or shown any indication of wanting the throne for himself. However, they do say it's the wolf in sheep's clothing one must watch out for." He said, "The palace library is where Prince Shane spends most of his free time." He said, "As much as I would like to stay by your side." Elena said, "Only the imperial family and their spouses may enter the library." Sir Philip whispers, "If you happen upon Prince Shane inside, you need not answer every one of his questions. You may even leave if you feel the need to. Moreover, should you find yourself in danger, please call out my name. Right now, your safety is more important to me than any imperial decree, Your Highness." Elena enters thinking, "I didn't intend to stay here for too long because of Philip's warning. Holding a book," she thinks, "but I can't seem to find what I'm looking for." Seeing a book, she thinks, "That book might contain the kind of information I'm searching for." She tries to get the book from up there. Meanwhile, a voice comes, oracles and curses. Hearing this, she gets shocked. A hand reached to the book before Elena's hand. Shane takes the book and asked her, "Why might you be interested in such a book?" Giving the book to Elena, he said, "I am Prince Shane. It is my pleasure to meet you, Crown Princess Leyla." Seeing him, Elena thinks, "So this is Prince Shane." She thinks, "I should keep any talking to a minimum as Philip advised me." She takes the book saying, "Thank you, Your Highness." Meanwhile, Shane grabs her hand saying, "It's been a long while." Kissing her hand, he said, "Since we last spoke face to face like this." He inquires, "Hasn't it? Leyla?" Hearing this, Elena gets shocked and thinks, "Is he acquainted with Leyla?" Elena gets confused and thinks, "How should I answer his question?" She thinks, whenever she returned from the palace, Leyla would always tell me about the Crown Prince. However, she never once mentioned meeting Prince Shane. It's possible that she just never told me about it. But he might be trying to test me. She would draw her hand from him saying, "Is that so?" She said, "I'm afraid I do not remember my childhood very well." She said, "Please allow me to apologize for failing to recognize you, Your Highness." Hearing this, he gets confused. Suddenly he starts laughing, "Haha. Haha." Elena gets confused. He said, "I believe it is I who should be asking for your forgiveness. I'm afraid that was just a joke, Your Highness." Hearing this, she gets shocked and thinks, "A joke?" Shane said, "The only time we've met, really, was when I secretly caught glimpses of you when you visited my brother in the past." Shane said, "I was curious how you'd respond and if you'd perhaps seen me before as well." He said, "Unfortunately, it seems I had my hopes set a little too high." Elena gets confused by his talk. He turns and said, "If you intend to remain in the library, would you like me to show you around?" Elena replied, "Oh, yes, if you don't mind." After some time the rain starts. Shane, noticing the rain, said, "I thought today would be a sunny day, but looks like it's begun to rain." Elena thinks, will the crown prince be alright? Philip did say subjugating monsters in nearby territories was something Prince Kyle did often, but still. Holding a book, Shane asked, "Are these really the books you were looking for?" He said, "All these books seem to be about the dragon's descendant and the Holy Maiden." "Do you really have any need for the information in these books? Being the Holy Maiden, I'm sure you know better than what these can tell you." Elena said, "Although the temple educated me on various matters, such as the etiquette of the imperial palace, I'm afraid what I know about the dragon's descendant and the Holy Maiden was learned through the legends that most are familiar with." She thinks, thinking back, the bishops kept an eye on us, so we wouldn't have a way of finding out about ourselves. She asked him, "What about you, Your Highness? Do you know much about the dragon's descendant?" Shane laughed and replied, "Haha. One would think so, wouldn't they?" He raised from her chair saying, "However, just like you, what I know regarding this matter is no different from what others know." He comes close to her and leaned towards her saying, "Though I do not know much about the dragon's descendant, I know my brother very well. More than anyone else, in fact." Shane said, "I've been curious from the very beginning whether it was about yourself or my brother you were trying to learn more about." He said, "But I think I have my answer now." He said, "I heard that the Holy Maiden is raised without knowledge of the outside world until she comes of age." Shane, tossing her hand, said, "You are alone in this palace, so I can't imagine how suffocating and lonely it must be for you." Meanwhile, Elena thinks, "Why is he touching my hand? He's making me uncomfortable." Shane said, "It's all right. I'm fully aware what kind of person my brother is." Elena thinks, "I can't deny that my initial encounter with the Crown Prince was full of surprises. However, all that I've seen of him since is him worrying for my safety. And yet this man seems to think that it's a given that I'd want to avoid Prince Kyle." Shane asked her, "Could I see your hand for a moment?" He gives her a sachet and said, "Please accept this small gift from me. Give this sachet to my brother, and I'm sure he'll be more than glad to receive it." Elena thinks, "A gift? I'm not sure what he's planning, but I should be wary as Philip warned me." Elena said, "I appreciate the gesture, but I'm afraid I can't." Meanwhile, Sir Philip knocks the door and shouts, "Your Highness." Shane asked, "What is it?" Sir Philip replied, "His Majesty says there is a matter wants to discuss with you regarding Crown Prince Kyle's return." Hearing this, she gets shocked and asked, "Has the Crown Prince returned safely?" Shane said, "As always, he was probably covered in blood upon his return. Am I right?" She gets shocked and replied, "Why, yes." She said to him, "I must go to him." Shane said, "It was a short time, but I was glad to spend it with you. Please take care." Elena rushed towards the door. Shane comes to the door and Sir Philip said to him, "I believe Her Highness misunderstood what you said, Your Highness." He asked, "What do you mean?" Sir Philip replied, "Well, the blood that the Crown Prince is always covered in is of the monsters he slays." Shane laughed and said, "Indeed." He said, "It was simply a harmless joke. I do hope Kyle will like my gift." Meanwhile, Elena asked Sir Philip, "I cannot see him right now." "But why?" He replied, "It is for your own safety, Your Highness." Julie said, "Indeed? I'm afraid it's not advisable to see Prince Kyle at the moment, Your Highness." Elena said, "He supposedly reported to the Emperor while covered in blood. Yet you are telling me that neither a doctor nor even I can enter his room?" Julie said, "We were ordered by Sir Kyle to refrain from saying anything regarding this matter to you. We ask for your forgiveness, Your Highness." Elena said, "Even so, I must." Suddenly some voices starts coming from Kyle's room. They all gets confused hearing this. Elena dashed towards the door quickly. She opens the door shouting, "Your Highness!" She enters the room and closed the door. She locked the door and Sir Philip shouts, "Please open the door, Your Highness! Your Highness!" Elena sighed and said, "Forgive me, Philip." Elena turns and asked Kyle, "Your Highness, are you all right?" Seeing him, she asked, "Your Highness." Suddenly she gets shocked seeing him. He was covered with blood and his room's floor was also messed with blood. His eye turns as a monster's eye. Seeing him like this, she starts thinking, is that Crown Prince Kyle? He comes close to her and she thinks, something feels strange about him. Seeing his eyes, she thinks, his pupils are slit vertically, like those of a beast. She thinks, is this what it's like for the dragon's descendant to slowly turn into a dragon? She thumped her hands and thinks, if that's the case, then it's even more reason for me to do something about it. Elena said, "It's me, Your Highness." She asked, "Can you recognize?" Kyle's vision was blurry and she said, "It's me, Leyla. The one who promised to turn you back into a human." Kyle replied, "Leyla? No, you are." Kyle thud down and Elena shouts, "Your Highness." She said, "Are you all right? Please allow me to call the physician immediately." Kyle asked her, "Why? Didn't you listen to Philip?" He said, "I'm sure I instructed him to stop you from entering the room." She said, "I heard you had returned covered in blood." Kyle said, "Didn't I tell you that I'm nearly immortal? Besides, this blood isn't mine." She said, "Even so, I can't help but worry about you." Kyle thinks, how strange. Usually, the pain from using the dragon's power persists well into the night. However, with Elena by my side, it feels as if the pain is fading away. He thinks, though it is probably just my imagination. He said, "You'd only be endangering yourself by staying here. Leave this room and listen to what Philip tells you." Elena thinks, the reason he prioritizes me over himself like this must be because of how much he loves Leyla. She thinks, I wonder why Leyla left behind a man like him just to run away. If I were in her position, I'm sure I would have taken a different path. Elena said, "I couldn't possibly leave you knowing your current state." She touches her face and he said, "You really don't listen, do you?" Elena replied, "I'm always listening. You are constantly on my mind, Kyle." Kyle thinks, the way she sees others, the way she wants to hasn't changed since the last time we met when we were young. And neither have I in wanting to find solace in her innocence. Suddenly Kyle smells scent from her body and gets shocked. She gets confused and asked, "Your Highness?" He lost in his thoughts, this familiar scent. It's the scent of her perfume. But how? Meanwhile in his thoughts, someone grabs him from her hairs. She said, "Where have you been, Kyle? I warned you not to wander around without my permission, didn't I?" "No. It can't be." A scary redhead ghost appears and said, "My, what a naughty child you are. Look at your mother when she's speaking to you." Lost in his thoughts, the ghost said to him, "I'm the only person who will ever love you now." Meanwhile, coming back to his sense, he said, "Stop." He slams her into the door and shouts, "Enough." Meanwhile, the sachet Shane gives to her felt on the ground. Elena thinks, I can't move at all. What do I do now? She thinks, his eyes are red again, so why hasn't he come back to his senses? He said, "You are mistaken, Deborah." He squeezed her shoulder and she thinks, Deborah? Who could that be? Who is Kyle mistaking me for? Kyle said, "Someone gave me her word." He said, "She promised to turn me into a human." He said, "So? Please, no more." Elena thinks, it's someone else that Kyle sees, not me. She thinks, and yet he's seeking my help. The hugged and she thinks, it's me that he's seeking, not Leyla. Elena, holding him in her arms, said, "It's as you say." She said, "I did promise you that." She thinks, may my words reach him. She said, "I'm here with you, Kyle." Kyle drops his face on her shoulder. Suddenly he comes back to his sense and gets confused. He asked her, "Where's Deborah?" Kyle asked her, "And why do I smell her perfume on you?" Hearing this, she thinks, perfume? Could it be from the sachet Prince Shane gifted me? She ponders and said, "I'll explain everything to you later." she said. For now, please fix your eyes on me. Kyle, seeing her, thinks, Elena. Suddenly he noticed her shoulder. He saw his shoulder hurt. Kyle said to her, I hurt you. Kyle said, as I thought, allowing you to stay by my side was a mistake. Elena said, please, Your Highness. Don't try to distance yourself from me. She said, after all, we are to share the same fate. After some time the door opens and Philip and Julie were still standing outside. Elena comes outside and they shouts, Your Highness. She said, forgive me for my actions earlier. I must have surprised you two a great deal. Philip said, please don't mind us, Your Highness. We are simply glad to see that you are safe. Julie said, truly. Elena said to her, Julie, could you prepare me a bowl of warm water and a soft cloth? Julie replied, of course, Your Highness. Julie went as fast as possible to take what Elena said to her. Elena turns towards Philip and said to him, Sir Philip. She said, did you stop me from entering the room because of Prince Kyle's command to prioritize my safety? She said, if so, you need not follow that command from now on. Sir Philip said, but Your Highness. As His Highness's personal guard, Elena said, it is only right that you prioritize his safety above all else. Elena grabs his hand. She said, please help me so that I might also be able to protect him despite my inadequacies. Sir Philip said, understood. Meanwhile Julie comes and said, I brought the things you asked for, Your Highness. She said, it's heavy, so allow me to carry it into the room for you, Your Highness. Elena said, no, it's all right. It's enough that you brought it here for me. She takes that and said, if possible, I ask that we be left to ourselves tonight. Meanwhile Elena cleaned Kyle, thinking, he was fully covered in blood, yet there's not a single wound on his body. It's like a testament to him being the dragon's descendant. She thinks, I wonder if it's always been this way for him. Has he always had to endure alone without seeking anyone's help just because he is immortal? Kyle said to her, there's no need for you to wash me. He said, I didn't allow you remain in this palace so you can be my maid. Besides, my body will heal on its own, so you need not worry. He said, I ask that you do not put yourself in harm's way again like you did today. Elena thinks, but you were trembling. You may possess immeasurable strength, but that doesn't mean you don't have fears. She clenched her hand and said, Your Highness, there's something I would like to ask you. Who is Deborah? Kyle gets shocked and asked, how do you know that now? He said, it seems I blurted out something unnecessary earlier. Kyle said, Deborah is the mother of my half-brother Shane. She dreamed of becoming the Empress, but she never did. And that broke her. Kyle asked her, are you curious about her? She replied, no, Your Highness. She said, it's you whom I am curious about. She said, I want to know about your past. Your feelings, your thoughts, your likes, your dislikes, everything. Kyle pulls her, saying, very well. Ask, and I shall tell you all that you want to know about me. He said, in return, I ask that you tell me about yourself as well. For instance. He said, I am intrigued as to who taught you the word Imago. She said, if I tell you the story behind that, you'll probably laugh at the silliness of it. She said, you see, although I remember it so vividly, there's no proof that it actually happened at all. Perhaps it will sound like a fairy tale to you. You know, like a story in which a wizard grants you a wish or one where you're able to fly. She said, in any case, I ask that you listen along as if I'm recounting a dream I had. Kyle asked, a dream? She replied, as you know, the temple I grew up in is a place that even the imperial family cannot enter without permission. She said, as such, it was difficult for me to make friends, especially ones who were my own age. However, the person who taught me the word, Imago, was a boy not much older than me. I remember being immediately convinced the moment I saw him. Convinced that that boy was an angel briefly sent to me from above. She said, when I saw the boy for the first time, I thought that I was perhaps dreaming. She said, as a matter of fact, I was even worried he might disappear if I approached him. So imagine my surprise when he spoke to me. In her memory, that boy was Kyle, and he asked her, "Who are you?" She replied, "Nice to meet you. My name is Elena." She starts questioning him, "Where are you from? What's your name? How long will you be staying here?" She asked, "Is there something I can help you with?" Kyle said, "You have a sister who shares your face, don't you?" Hearing this, she gets shocked and paused. She said, "I'm sorry." She said, "I see that you came here to meet Leyla." She said, "Looks like I got a little carried away thinking you'd come to see me." Hearing this, he starts sweating inside. He holds her shoulder and said, "No." He said, "I only asked to make sure I was right. You are the one I came to see." Coming back to her wedding day, Elena was sleeping and Kyle sitting next to her glanced at her. He touches her hairs and said, "You'll never know." He said, "How my heart is stirred by your every word." Coming back to present day, Kyle asked her, "How are you certain that the boy you met that day was actually human?" She replied, "I am not, I'm afraid." She said, "After all, it's possible that I had actually imagined it all in my head in my loneliness." She said, "Regardless, the word imago, which he taught me, is still special to me." Elena said, "I'd never heard of such a word until then. So it might be that I really was visited by an angel." She turns towards him and said, Now that I think about it, it's quite strange." She said, "You seem to bear some resemblance to that boy, Your Highness. It's a shame I didn't think to at least ask him his name." She said, "I'm sure he has probably forgotten about me, but to me, our encounter remains a special memory to this day." He said, "Kyle." She gets confused and asked, "Your Highness?" Kyle stares at her. He thinks, I wonder how Elena would react if I told her that I'm that very same boy. How would she react if I told her that I actually knew her real name? No, I mustn't. The palace is constantly under the watchful eyes of the Emperor. It might prove harmful in the long run if she knows that I'm aware she isn't the real Holy Maiden. For now, I need to continue keeping it a secret for Elena's sake. Kyle said, "You called me by my name while I was delirious, didn't you?" He said, "Yet now you address me formally." Elena said, "I'm afraid I might have done so without thinking in the heat of the moment." Meanwhile, Kyle grabs her hand. He said to her, "Call me by my name. It's more comfortable for me that way." Elena said, "Well then. Sir Kyle?" He said, "You aren't my subordinate now, are you? You're my wife." Elena said, "Kyle." After some time, Elena fell asleep, and Kyle sits next to her. He touches her lip and then his own, thinking, I don't understand. How did Elena end up being betrothed to a monster like me? Leyla, that woman. Just where in the world is she? I have so many questions, but I'm scared I might lose you if I dig too deep. How I wish you were right, Elena, that I was an angel sent to you from above. But then, even if that were the case, I suppose my wish would remain the same. I'd pray that my wings wear out, so that I might live out my life with you as human. He said, How am I to give up on you now? Honestly, don't know anymore.